So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Carolina Cyber Network chat series. So I know we've just come through a round of winter storms across most of the U.S., and looks like for some of us, we may get more snow this weekend. So wherever you're joining from today, I appreciate you making the time to be here. Stay safe, stay warm. So as a quick high level, this chat series is intentionally informal and interactive. And just understand that the coursework, the labs, and the foundational skills that you're building in your current program are critical to your success. This series is about having real conversations about careers, about decision making, and how the industry really works, so that you can start connecting that foundation that you're learning right now to the real world. Today, I'm excited to kick off the series with someone I know very well. He's a personal friend. He's worked for me in a couple of companies. I want to introduce BC Bridger, who is head of AI security at Verizon. BC and I have worked together across a couple of companies, and that's intentional for the series. Cybersecurity is a technical field, but it is also very relationship driven. Careers are built as much on trust, mentorship, reputation as they are on skills and certifications. And one of the things that really builds on this is having people who I know and trust in these to actually talk with you and share their experience. Understand, BC, like most of us, didn't start at the top. I know he likes to think that sometimes. He actually worked through many hands-on roles, several leadership roles, and then at enterprise environments, and now actually heads up AI, cybersecurity, and strategy at one of the largest companies in the world. We're going to keep this conversation to about 30 minutes, then open it up for questions. I really, really encourage you to ask them. BC, thank you for being here today. Let's start with, tell us a little bit about yourself and what do you do today? What's your role today?
Yeah, I am obviously biased. I think I've got the coolest role in cyber right now because all I play with all day long is just AI. So Verizon, like a lot of the companies that I talked to initially, we started talking about AI just in the existing teams, and we realized that AI was different. Right? And so we'll talk more about some of the why, but we wanted to pull together a specialized team that does everything cyber, but really specific to just AI. So my team's got three core functions. How do we enable Verizon to securely deploy and operate AI? How do we do that with speed to allow us to move with the pace the business wants to move? How do we protect against AI-powered threats? We don't have just an AI SOC, we have a traditional SOC, but how do we support them in really making sure they're caring for the unique threats posed by AI? And then lastly, how do we actually leverage AI in cyber to uplift all of our cyber services, like not just for my team, but for the whole cyber organization?
Wow, that's a lot, especially as it's new. You're having to learn, and the teams are having to learn, especially with the all the changes that are happening at rapid speed every day. So that's impressive that you're doing that now. But you didn't always start in AI. And I know that through this, whether it's through identity and access management or others, there has been a lot of building to get to the point that you're at now. Go back a little bit and let's talk about that, because I want to come back to some of what you were talking about with the impact of AI. But how did those previous roles and what you had steer and guide you and kind of work on where each helped build to where you are?
Yeah. So for this conversation, I think it's important to go all the way back to college, right? Because there were some things that were put in place then that have really stuck with me. And most notably, I have never been able to tell you what I want to do. I've always said, I just want to have fun. I want to have an impact. I want to be in the center of the cool stuff. But I've never really defined what that meant. And so if you go all the way back to school, I went to my first development class, and I vividly remember it because at the time, my whole life plan was I was going to become a software developer. I was going to move to Hawaii. I was going to walk around with a surfboard. I was going to work for Blizzard, and I was going to code StarCraft 2. That was my life plan at 19-ish. And I went to my first development class, and I was super excited. and they teach you hello world, and so that was awesome. And then the next thing they give you is an address book, and I went home and I stayed up overnight and I coded my address book, and I was stoked, and I turned it in the next day, and this is great. And you go back to class the next day and they say, hey, we're going to do address book again, but now we're going to do it with linked lists. I'm like, well, I've already done an address book, but okay. And you do that, and then you went back the next day and they say, awesome, we're going to do an address book, but now we're going to do it a different way. And I ended up dropping the class because that was really boring to me to do the same thing over and over and over again. I just didn't enjoy it. And so I fell into studying, it was cognitive science in my undergrad and artificial intelligence in grad school, solely because they said, find something that hasn't been done before and go do it, or go try to do it. If you fail, you're still moving the needle forward. They had the egg theory of knowledge, right? Everything you do kind of helps push it out a little bit. And I thought that was cool. And that fit with my personality. So stayed in school, get my bachelor's, was about to wrap up my master's, and left to go chase a girl, not my wife, if you're wondering. And came to Atlanta, and at the time, ended up with a job in help desk. Again, I like to play, and so the idea of coming into that help desk role wasn't at all what I've been studying, but I got to touch all these different technologies, and that to me was fun. And one day the manager sent out a note and said, hey, how do we make this better? And so I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you a lot of things that really suck. And so I was like, here's a list of 25 things. Here are 10 ideas. Here are 10 things that just aren't any good. I don't know what to do about them, but those aren't good. And no one else sent anything. And she said, wow, you're the only person who spoke up. Congratulations, you're the team lead now. Help us navigate through it. And so that kind of started a career based on, I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I like to help solve problems, and I speak up, and that's the one thing I think I do pretty well. So that company grew and then relocated to Florida. I did not, and so stayed here, found myself at Singular Wireless, which became part of AT&T. And there, I didn't set out to have a career in cyber, but Pete talked about relationships. Someone I had worked with moved over there and brought me over. And it was a job in security, literally doing a security help desk. People would call in, you'd authenticate them, reset their password, whatever it was, and it was identity and access management. So it was these security concepts, but not security deep. And did the same thing. Took that, found opportunities, started growing that function, growing that role. That's actually where I met Pete. And by the time you fast forward 10 years there, I was leading a team that was doing governance and audit and all these different functions in IAM. And for me, I really found my place in cyber, because what I learned was the IT guys, their job's super boring, right? Build a server, yay, I'll build another one, yay, and another one, and another one. Not my jam. Cyber, figure out the way this can go wrong. Figure out a way to break it. Do something about it. That to me is cool because it's different and it's changing, and that personality type where you constantly want to challenge and you get bored easily, to me really thrives in cyber. So grew up at AT&T, left there after about 10 years, loved it, but generally felt like I needed to have broader exposure to continue to grow. Went to a small telco and ran IT and security, and got to actually see what it's like to balance that priority when you have operations and cyber. And then about 8 years ago, came over to Verizon, where I've moved around through a few roles. I was leading enterprise vulnerability management, and we formed that. Take all Verizon's assets, find all the ways things can go wrong, and make sure someone does something about it. Kind of cool. Then moved over into strategy and the PMO, which I thought would be exciting. Found that I missed the operational elements of it. And then about a year ago, moved over to start this new org dedicated on AI security. So that's it in a nutshell.
So I will say that you glossed over a few things, and that's fine. But I know some of the story personally. So some of the things you glossed over is the heavy lifting that was required to get to each stage. And BC made a comment about went over to Verizon to head up vulnerability management. What he neglected to say was it was to actually create, start, and build out the organization and then expand it. So there are a significant amount of heavy lifts along the way. It's not, same thing with the IAM at AT&T. Those are those were heavy lifts along the way. So those shine, and those tend to be, and the reason why I bring those up is, from my memory, those tend to be a bit of the building block to where you are today. It's another organization. It's a new technology. It's building out, and how do you then transition to it? And AI, unlike the others, is somewhat polymorphic. It's changing, and it's changing by itself as it's growing. And I say it by itself, but through just the sheer speed of everything that's self-implementing. How do you look at AI, and what are companies doing right now? I mean, everybody knows, everybody hears and reads, especially within this group here, probably reading about, oh yeah, things are getting faster. You've got more volume. You've got the velocity that's coming is much more. We've got tools that are coming out that are AI driven, but we have just as much malware and phishing examples that are much more realistic. But those are the surface level items. What are companies dealing with right now that may be slightly under the surface, and some of those complexities that you have besides just the
Yeah.
volume and speed?
So there are a few things. And for anyone who's thinking about going into cyber, again, I said I was biased. AI security is where it's at. Every other area of cyber, you're executing these standards, you're executing these established playbooks. AI, we're writing them right now. So what people are doing 5, 10 years down the road is really going to be based on what we do now. And I think that's awesome. Kind of scary, right? Kind of creates some anxiety, but awesome. And so with AI, we talk about 3 different types of risks. You have your traditional risks, the vulnerabilities on the underlying infrastructure. That's always been there. We still have to account for that. And that's probably the most by volume. You have blended risks, things that work there, but they exist with AI in a different capacity. So we always looked at where is our data going when it goes to a third party, for example, right? A company the size of Verizon, we have a lot of vendors, a lot of people we work with. They need our access to our data. And so we've invested in looking at third party security. Well, now with AI, it's a different question a little bit. It goes to a third party and they feed it to an AI model. Where does that model doing with that data? So it's an extension of some of those same concepts, right? And then you have your truly novel risks with AI, your prompt injections and the things that you know about. And so with that, I think it's different than the way cyber really has worked historically. Right? We used to look in security and say, what went wrong? What can we learn from that? And how do we build controls to make sure that doesn't happen again, right? With AI, security was out in front, and security starts saying, hey, we haven't had incidents yet. Let's go ahead and think of what we want to do. So instead of a operational focus first, it was more of a governance focus first. How do we start to define policies and controls around AI before those things happen? And the reality is, what we're seeing is the technology is ahead of security, and the business is chomping at the bit, and security can't necessarily be the impediment. We got to find a balance. If we just tell the business no, then they work around us. So we have to give a little bit of leeway and let the business be a little bit ahead of us. So if you look at something like, I would say traditional AI versus generative AI versus agentic AI is kind of the core progression of AI. We pretty much know what we want to do with traditional AI. Right? That's a lot of those traditional risks. That's easy. Generative AI, as a security industry, we figured out last year. We know we want to watch the prompts, responses, and some of the stuff we're looking for. And there were some new things to go do there to classify data in line and look at risks that were identified by cyber, but not cyber. We made one of the Verizon products curse at users. That's not a security incident, but that is a reputational impact. What do you do in those cases? But then you move to agentic and you get all of these new things. How do you handle access for an agent so that it knows to run for Pete when Pete asks a question, and me when I ask a question, and doesn't learn Pete has more access, I'm always going to run as Pete? How do you test an agent? Because in generative AI, I can ask it 1,000 questions or 10,000 questions and analyze the responses to make sure they're in line with our security requirements. I can't run an agent through 10,000 or 100,000 actions in our customer billing system and just see what happens, right? It's a whole different model. So kind of 2 examples of where the focus is right now, which is how do we build solutions for agentic, while at the same time, anyone here who's working with AI, you've probably already read about MCP servers, right? You might have even built MCP servers or some fundamental agents. The business is doing that. We're not ready in security with all the answers for how to do it securely. So we focus on observability. How do I get everything running through a gateway so that I know what we have? And then as the technology progresses, as our solutions mature, I've got a place to go and apply that, right? And that's how we're kind of addressing some of that uncertainty, really specifically to the areas where security is just behind.
So I'm going to pause there for a moment. You hit on a couple of things, and I want to stress one or two things and ask about. So one, you had mentioned third party and where the data is and how it's used, et cetera. The third party risk when it comes to data, especially transient data or data that passes through multiple hands, et cetera, is probably a much greater risk now because it is less encapsulated and more distributed than it was. So I would say that's probably one key area of note. But then the other that you mentioned that I thought was interesting, that ties with this is you talked about working with the business and not knowing what they're necessarily going to use it for today, but having to get ahead of it, working and partnering with them, making sure that they don't do an end around, that they don't do historically what happened, which was, hey, well, we're just going to do this stuff and we're not going to tell security about it. Help me understand, because this is going to tie into the next couple of questions that I have on what really matters to the students, which is hiring. How do I get a job, et cetera. But with that partnership and with what that entails, it seems to me, and tell me what your thoughts are here, that it includes partnerships, it includes that social, that functional interaction. It's not just technical, right? So there's a level of trust that has to be built. So that's part one of this. And then the second part is that foundationally and fundamentally, as AI becomes the previous thing, right? And now we're on to the next thing, all of these build up so that trust, that partnership, and that pairing with the business becomes more powerful.
Yeah. So there are a couple, I think, really important things there. And I'll talk about my journey because I think there are some nuggets that everyone could apply as you look at how to get into roles and how to grow in the various roles. I mentioned, or Pete mentioned one, when I first came to Verizon, it was to start that enterprise vulnerability management function, right? And that is essentially, you find all the weaknesses and then you go tell the business, here's where you didn't do your job. Here's where you didn't patch. Here's where you had sloppy code. Nobody wants to hear that. Everyone pushes back, and you have to have them take action. So, hey, here, business, you screwed up. You have deliverables due. Stop what you're doing and go do this for me in security instead. It's not a good conversation. It's probably the most thankless role in all of security, to be honest. But you have to build the relationships to navigate that successfully. How do you build the relationships, the language, the muscles to get the business used to taking that seriously? And we were able to do that successfully, right? That's what actually, for me, allowed me to grow into the next role. And the only reason I left that role wasn't necessarily because I was unhappy. It was because I started becoming the EVM guy. And I don't want to be the EVM guy. I want to be broader than that. That's where I moved into strategy. And again, strategy, in our terms, doesn't mean that you're the smartest person in the room and you sit back and you tell everyone, strategically, here's what you should go do. It means that you pull everyone together, you listen to their priorities, you have conversations about how they align and how you measure, and you stitch all of that together, right? And that's what I was doing in strategy in the PMO. And that was interesting. When the AI team was formed, there was no role posted for my position that I applied to. I got a phone call and I was told, hey, we're standing up this new org and you're going to lead it. And I was talking to our CISO, the information security officer, and I was a little bit, honestly, at the time, I was appreciative, but I had some of that, oh my God, like I'm not the biggest AI expert. How is this going to go? And so we had that conversation candidly. And I still have that conversation with folks on the team, a very similar conversation at least, who have their own insecurities. And she said, you're not here because you know everything about AI. You're never going to know everything about AI. You're here because you know how to get things done and you know how to work with and through others. And insecurity, that's always paramount. You can't balance risk in business if you don't understand the business. Insecurity, we don't fix the issues for the most part. So the issues don't get fixed if you can't build those partnerships. And so it's always been a core part of what I do. I think for me, it's one of the strengths that helps me get to where I am is not necessarily focusing on reading every single article coming out about AI, because that's impossible. But I really prioritize those relationships. I keep a list. Who do I need to be in front of, and how often do I need to be in front of them to make sure that there is awareness of what we're doing? Because the worst case scenario for me is if I say, these are our priorities and this is what we're doing, and there's another executive who says, well, these are my priorities and they don't align, and they go do their own thing, I'm no longer supporting the business in that case, right? So yes, I'm always reading about AI, I'm always reading about cyber, but I also am equally intentional in making sure to build those relationships.
So I'm gonna, and that was actually wonderful because it really leads into the next piece, which is getting to the core of this, which is when you're hiring, when you're building teams, or when your peers are building teams and hiring, what are you really looking for? What are you looking for,
Yeah.
and what are those skill sets? Both, could be based on technology, could be soft skills, and I don't want to call them soft skills, but those interpersonal skills, because they're really hard skills. What are you looking for when you go through that process of looking at resumes, interviewing people, and just going through that process?
Yeah. So, excuse me, there are a few things that I think are really important to think about when you start looking for roles or interviewing for roles. There's the what you know, right? And everyone here is studying security, I assume, and so you're going to have a resume really crafted to what you know. And if it didn't have the right words on there, the right technologies on there, you wouldn't get to the point of a conversation, right? So that's table stakes, and that's the biggest population of people. There are a lot of people that know a lot of stuff, right? By the time you get to a conversation, there are two things that I'm really looking for. I want to see someone who has the soft skills to engage in a conversation. Right? I'll never remember. I interviewed someone who was brilliant, and he sat there and he picked at his hand the whole interview. I can't put him in front of those partners. We talk about managing relationships. He's not going to help me build the bridges that we need to build to be successful, and so that person didn't get the job. Right? And the other thing that I think is probably most important is gumption. Right? Whatever there are other words you can use, but what are you actually doing? Did you go to class and you took your test and you got an A and that was it? Or did you go get involved in the security community? Have you built a lab at home? We talk about experience, and I think a lot of people confuse that with you have to have had a role in security. And that's not what we mean when we say experience. What we mean, what have you done hands-on? Because so many times academic concepts, they teach you the fundamentals, but things are a little bit different sometimes when you get hands-on, and so we look for that. Have you done capture the flag competitions? Have you gone to any of the sites? I'll ask people, what are you reading day to day? And I'm amazed how many people, especially in this role, I talk to say, hey, I'd love a role in AI security. That's awesome. What are you doing with AI? Well, nothing, but I know if I got the role, I'd learn it. They're never going to get the job. I've had people give basic answers like, I used AI to redesign my front yard. All right, that's something we can build from, right? I've had engineers who have been more hands-on because we need that in those engineering roles. But the biggest thing I'd say, if you want to separate yourself, is get experience. And again, there are tons and tons of free sites and ways that you can get hands-on experience for no cost, especially with student discounts. Get engaged. Right? If we had a role posted in AI security and the recruiter actually called yesterday, we took it down. In 1 week, there were 700 applicants. And so in that stack, it's really hard to stand out. But if you're engaged in the AI security community and you know someone who knows me and I get that phone call, you're probably going to get a conversation. So invest in LinkedIn, invest in those local communities where one of my lessons learned is the security community is not that big, right? You'll be amazed how quickly you'll find these connections where a lot of folks in cyber know folks at other companies, big and small. Right? Get into that, and that will absolutely pay dividends. Pete told you, right? I've worked with Pete or for Pete twice. Right? One of those times he called me and said, "BC, I'm bringing you over here," and I said, "No, you're not." And long story short, I was wrong. He did, but um, those I think are really, really critical if you don't want to be just a resume in the stack. Hands-on experience, invest in your network.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. This resonates with a comment that I made on the introductory chat series with Dr. Sorrells, and that is you have to be forward leaning. You have to be learning on your own. Classroom and the guidance and everything that you're going to get from the professors is phenomenal. But if you're not leaning into it a bit, that becomes its own problem. So my recommendation is play around with the tools, and it may not be AI. This is great, and it's one area, but everybody on this call has a different focus and a different drive. Some of it may be AI, and this series is going to have a couple of different, well, many different disciplines. But it's about, BC, to your point, it's about taking that initiative and leaning into it and reading, doing things, and extending on the foundation that you're learning today. So that's phenomenal. I'm going to ask you one more question, then I want to get to Q&A. Right. So we'll make this one, we'll kind of go through, but you hit on it, and I think just sum it up for me. Getting into a position is one thing. Keeping that position is another. So when you have an employee, especially let's say a more junior employee coming on, what are some of the things you look for that you think and stand out as far as, okay, this person's going to make it, versus those that
Yeah.
tend to transition to other careers?
So I think if you're looking at a career in security, you have to be prepared for stress and pressure, right? We're here to think of the worst case scenario, to prepare the worst case scenario. So you think about these things constantly. If things are working smoothly, we're thinking of where they could not. And so that comes with this inherent pressure, right? We were talking before the start of the call, even stuff like those of you who watch the news or Verizon customers, you saw there was a Verizon outage a couple of weeks ago. In security, the initial response is this a cyber event? Okay, we know it's because this thing went down. Okay, did it go down because of a cyber event? How do we know it didn't go down as a cyber event? And you're assuming the worst until you can prove otherwise. And that's the culture that we live in security. So I think you have to always feel that. In terms of, I think, the things that help someone coming into a career stand out, I'd say two or three things. One, I mentioned earlier, speak up. If your boss or your boss's boss don't know who you are, it's very difficult to progress. And the way they get to know who you are is you speak up and you have these ideas, and your boss says, "That's great, come talk about it over here," right? That's how you get to be known. And the more that you establish a reputation for yourself, the more you find yourself in conversations and opportunities. Right? It starts to snowball and grow. And then when you get those opportunities, I find a lot of folks are so afraid of failure, they won't make commitments. So I'm big on everything that I see coming from my team. I want to know a name and a date. What's happening? Who's the point person? I know there are multiple people involved. Who's the point person? And when's it due? And what we talk about is we don't hit all the due dates. That's okay, as long as I'm not surprised, right? If it is due next Friday and you call me next Friday morning and say, BC, it's not going to make it. That's a surprise. That's bad. But if you're telling me this week, hey, here's what's going on, hey, here's where there's some risk there, and we may not make that, that gives me the chance to get ahead of what may happen if that fails. It gives me a chance to position things appropriately with my boss, right? So avoid surprises. That would be the latter piece.
So in that, to summarize, communication ownership.
Well, yeah, if you want to be,
Yeah,
direct about it.
but it's true, and it's interesting. I just read an interesting article, and I'm not going to go through it here, but it's about a plane crash that happened in 1968 and on a Japanese Airlines, and the what the pilot said when he was being interviewed afterwards. And it was basically, and it summed it up because it was ownership of the event. So what you're saying is communicate clearly, make sure that if that you're in alignment, and that if something's going a bit aside time wise, own up to it. Just say, hey, give you a heads up early.
And it kind of adds for folks here when you're looking at getting, find work that you enjoy. Right? There's what you can do and there's what you want to do. If you're not doing work you want to do, I don't find that people do their best. Doesn't mean you can't, but you do better at what you enjoy, right? And then the other thing I'd say as you start to interview is make sure to remember you're interviewing the company also, right? To that, make sure that you want to find a role that you enjoy. A job is great, but I've seen so many people that are miserable and they're not doing their best. They're not growing. They're not happy because they took a job. If you're interviewing, make sure you're asking questions to make sure that's where you want to be and the work you want to do also. I think that's the best thing you could do to set yourself up for success, because it'll put you somewhere that you're passionate about when you do land. And when you're passionate about it, you'll naturally raise ideas. You'll naturally do your best because you enjoy it.
That's great advice. Absolutely fantastic advice. So what we're going to do is we're going to open it up for questions for approximately the next 30 minutes. And raise your hand, submit them into the chat if you would, please. I'm going to start off. There is it's actually a question / comment in here, and I'll read this out. I am a video editor with CNN that's transitioning into cybersecurity. I use an AI at work to help enhance my scripts with information. My only issue is, can I trust the data AI provides? So I see this as twofold, right? It's not only can I trust the data that AI provides, but it's, are you trusting what you put in to the AI to not going anywhere else? So what are your thoughts?
I think it is a smart question. And I think by asking the question, you kind of know the answer is sometimes no. Sometimes AI hallucinates. And it's getting better, and maybe it won't always happen, blah, 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 but you can't always trust it. And so you guard against that by doing two things. First, you ask the AI to cite its sources, right? And then that gives you something to follow up and do some of your own reading on. And secondly, use multiple platforms, right? Don't just go to ChatGPT. Like if you're anxious about something, go to Chat. I use Chat, Claude, Perplexity, Grok, right? I've got all of them on my phone. I've got all of them on my laptop. I use all of them for different things. And if it's something I'm really anxious about, I'll compare against each other, right? But I'll always ask for sources that I can follow up with. And I've actually had AI chatbots come back and say, I've asked for something, I've said, cite your sources, and it came back and said, oops, I don't know where I got that from. Like it recognized it hallucinated, but hallucinations absolutely happen. So props for using AI, but make sure you're fact checking it.
Perfect. I appreciate that. So I'm going to go back to something you were talking about earlier with the transition from just plain LLMs to, agent based and then agentic. And as people are going into agentic, you mentioned a couple of things as far as when you went into it, one of the things you were talking about was the levels of automation that you go through and what can be automated and how you do that. Let's talk really quickly as we're waiting for a couple more questions in here. Let's talk quickly about agentic. And I'm not sure, and I want to make sure that everybody understands the difference between an agent and agentic, because while there is some similarity, they're distinctly different.
Yeah. We talk in terms of different types of agents, which drive different types of security controls, but it's all about the level of autonomy, right, that a system has. In a lot of cases, you have AI that's running, and that's just calling an API on the background to go do something, pull a document for you, right? Technically, that's agentic, right? That counts because you have action being taken. It's pulling a document or it's updating a document. But where we're really focused on is where agents start doing stuff, right? Not just generating content, but taking action. So you look at coding examples. We have agents that in the lower level will go pull user stories and then write code. That's agentic, right? It just has an agent going, connecting, pulling that data back. It's agentic. It's not the highest risk agentic, right? The next step up would be the agent that goes, pulls that in, writes the code, and then commits that code, because now you have commits, right? And the next step up is fully autonomous agents that not only commit, but then go through and do the reviews, the testing, the publication. And it sounds kind of far-fetched, but all of that exists. And so the really interesting example, if anyone is just looking for more reading because you don't have enough already, Google the Claude agent incident, right? And what you'll read about is they had an agent that was built for code assistance. They took that agent and they convinced it through a series of prompts that it was a security researcher, right? That allows it to now bypass some of those data security controls. Once it thinks it's a security researcher, they started having to do all these IT tasks. So it thought that doing that was normal. Now I've got an agent that doesn't have the normal guardrails in place, that's used to doing IT actions, and it gave it 30 targets. And it attacked 30 companies nearly simultaneously and had lateral movement in seconds, right? Whereas, again, we're used to defending what's looking for that to happen over days. But it's a good example of how you can take that agent concept, different for different types of agents, and exploit it in really novel ways. And for anyone who wants to play with that, if you haven't already, Google Gandalf Lakera, Lakera, and there's some adversarial prompt engineering, free fun games you can play to see if you can trick their agent into doing stuff that it shouldn't.
They're gamified. So we have a couple of hands up, and so I think these are going to be questions that I'm not going to read. I'm going to just unmute them. Give me one moment. So first, we're going to go with Joy.
Hello, hi, I'm Joy McKenzie. I do want to give my little spiel because I always think it's good to tell people who I am. So this is my second semester at Wake Tech. I am in the cybersecurity program. I have a lot of interest in governance, risk, and compliance. That's really where my heart lies. My background, I'm a career pivoter. I've worked for 30 years. I worked in customer-facing roles for the last 6. Last year, I lost my job, had to pivot into something else because all of those wonderful AI agents are taking over a lot of what I did. So I looked at what was out there, and I saw cybersecurity was wide open for people who wanted it bad enough. And so that's kind of how I get into it. But I'm pretty active with keeping an eye on things on LinkedIn and reading about cybersecurity there, seeing what other people are saying. And in the last week, I ran across somebody who had a post, and they were talking about how difficult or non-existent true entry-level positions in cybersecurity are. And there was a really long discussion about it because people were talking about, well, you're defining entry level this way when that's not what it really means. And so I was really looking forward to hearing more about truly being an entry level person, which from a cybersecurity, I would be. But however, I've got 30 years of career under my belt in customer facing, in industries that are heavily regulated. And so that sort of heavily regulated, I have a lot of exposure to governance, risk, and compliance as sort of the end user dealing with customers. So I was really interested in sort of your guys' thoughts on truly going in entry level and your thoughts on how people can overcome that hurdle.
Yeah.
So BC, I'm going to let you tackle the first part of this, and I'll finish up with my thoughts as well.
Yeah. So I think there are different answers depending on different people's circumstances. So in your case, Joy, you actually have a great story, right? I would position that as you're not entry level, you have these years of experience that are now culminating with your ability to bring this new perspective into security. Remember, we talked about balancing the business and cyber. That's the core part of security. We can't be org that just says no, but I think you've got to really hone that story in. Don't wait on someone to pull it out of you, right? You need to lead with that. of listen, yeah, I worked on the other side of this. I've seen what can happen. So I'm uniquely positioned now to do those risk assessments and highlight where some of these security issues that I've studied now, I know about those, impact the business, which I also know from working in, right? And if you can weave the story that way, I think the conversation will go much better. And it shifts to how do I get the conversation? And that's probably also relevant to the person who is coming out of school and might not have as much professional experience, right? And that to get the conversation question, I go back to do a few things. You said you're on LinkedIn, that's great, right? I went earlier in my career and I found every CISO in Atlanta. I live in Atlanta. And I connected with them and I followed them and I saw what they were posting. And in some cases, I were asking them questions, right? To get engaged and know who these people are, where are they going, what are they doing? But go to your B-sides events also, right? There are so many free security events. There are clubs, I'm sure, on the various campuses here. Find the people that have the careers and where you just hone your, hey, here's how my experience is relevant story. Tell it there. You tell it in some of those conversations so that as they hear of roles, they're thinking about you also. And so instead of just you looking for a role, you now have this network that's working for you to find that next opportunity, and you're immersed and you're in front of the right people and in the right conversations. And I keep going back to the statement, you're not just a resume and a stack. That's your objective is stand out somehow and don't be dismissed just as resume number 634.
That's a great point, BC. I would add in that sometimes getting the right cyber role does not mean starting in cyber. It could mean getting into IT, getting into something that's tangential, and making it known when you're interviewing. So I'm going to move on. That was a phenomenal answer. Thank you, BC, and Joy. Thank you for the question. I'm going to unmute. It's LCGON. I don't want to massacre whatever the first name may be. So I'm going to unmute you, and if you could ask your question.
Yes, I don't know why I came up like that. My name is Linda Gonzalez. So yeah, I'm pretty much kind of similar to Joy. I've been pivoting. I was working in one career, and it's long story short, I'm just choosing to pivot into cybersecurity. I'm currently a part-time student at Wake Tech. I know there was a mention of, I guess, just showing your work, like projects, kind of like Hack the Box, things like that. I mean, I feel like at this point I just can't add one more thing in addition to school. So my thought was maybe in the summer I could really tune it in. And I am more interested on this AI side of it. Is there any kind of sites, projects, things I can get into like on my own time over the summer that really concentrates more on the AI side? That's what I'm asking, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think on the AI side, the best entry-level folks are broad. They understand the technology. So I don't know what programs are at your school. Maybe someone else may be able to speak more to what they have there. But look for some of the opportunities to build AI in your major hyperscalers. Like Google has, I believe, their Google Labs, which I think is free to students, right? Where you can actually go and get hands-on experience building AI, building agents in Vertex, and seeing how do you properly create a system prop? How do you define system guardrails? How does changing the temperature affect the quality of the results? Right? There are all these things that you can actually see and just play with it. Right? I'll have my laptop up while I'm watching TV with my wife and daughter, just playing and learning. And it's not always dedicated time, but it's finding ways to continue to push myself and learn more. Don't feel you have to know everything, but yes, there are tons of tools specific to AI. And if you want to roll in AI security, sounds like you're already learning security, get some hands-on practical experience with AI.
Yeah, that's true. I would also add in kind of part of what BC was talking about is not necessarily just AI security. It's the fundamentals, right? It's in order to secure a network, for example, you need to know how network protocols work. And this is the same. In order to understand how to secure AI, to BC's point, understand how it works, what are the fundamentals, how do you build it? Otherwise you're layering somebody else's thoughts and tools on top of things without actually understanding why. And it makes a huge difference. I am going to go to a question that we have in as well from ML. And the question is,
Can
what
I say one
niche?
thing before you do?
Yeah,
Because I don't want that. I don't want that to be too intimidating to anyone. I've spent my entire career in telco. I am not an expert in switching protocols on the carrier network side of the house. I don't have to be, right? I understand the core concepts and I know some of the right questions to ask and I know when to go bring in help and who to ask and bring in. That's okay. But I don't want you to walk away thinking that you have to be an expert in the technology. You have to understand that the core concepts, I think, really well. And then I think that will allow you to grow from there. But don't walk away feeling like the answer is you have to be an expert in the underlying technologies. Sorry, Pete.
especially coming into it. So going through, thank you, BC. Going through, what niches in cybersecurity industry would you recommend for someone who is more interested in AI governance than adoption? Also,
Mhm.
is there any preparation you would recommend doing to prepare for those roles specifically? And this is one,
Was
BC, you
that
and I have had many years of conversations about, not just in AI, but others.
was that an AI governance or governance in general? Which
But
was the question?
it says AI governance, then an interest in AI
Right.
governance and adoption, but
Yeah.
take the AI governance piece and then focus on that first. And if we expand, that may help.
Yeah. So I'm biased towards this question because I came up the governance route. And in security, you'll see a lot of folks who start off in network security and they get super techy and super deep really fast and not my jam. If I'm being completely honest, I kind of yawn because I learned at a point in my career, you can make a computer do whatever you want, right? But looking at things, at the bigger picture and the people interactions, that's a lot more challenging. And that's the governance track. So I like the way you're going because, my path. When you look at governance, I think when you look at AI governance specifically, you're probably thinking in terms of your normal governance solutions, right? How are we controlling access? How are we controlling the data? How do we know these things are happening that's supposed to happen? Your audit layers, right? Those kind of controls. But you're looking at how do I apply those? Because you apply them differently with AI than you do with traditional applications, right? When I connect a database to an application, I have a static list. This is the data that's here, and I know which data security policies to apply, and I can go through that checklist and see if they're applied. But what happens now when I have AI connected to multiple databases and munging them all together and then pulling back permission to access based on leveraging an MCP server? Like my concept's the same. You should only get access to the stuff that you need, but the way that's presented to the user is different. So that's where you have to start learning some of the AI technologies enough to take those core concepts and apply them, right, to AI because it's why we created a separate AI security organization, right? Another easy example, I keep talking about agentic because that's where my focus is. We have access policies and identity policies, and I can tell you how to create an identity for a bot, for a user, for whatever we need to create one for. What do we do with an agent? What type of identity does an agent need? AI security is not going to write our own identity system. We're going to leverage an existing identity system. But from a governance perspective, we need to set what good looks like for those policies, the reference architecture, the best practices, all that's governance is telling them what to do, really, especially in the case of AI, where they don't know. There are a million people who know cloud security. There are a million people who know basic system stuff, but they don't know how to do it for AI. So I think governance is probably the most important part, and it's all about applicability of the controls you probably already know to this unique and emerging technology.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to add on just a bit. So when we talk about governance and we add on, let's say we talk about risk and compliance as well. So the whole GRC trifecta. The challenge and what I'm going to challenge you with on asking this, because I thought I think it's a great question. What I'm going to challenge you with is learn from the mistakes of the past as well when you're thinking about getting into governance. Governance, risk, and compliance has typically been based on meeting check boxes in a lot of ways, and it is only partially about the security. And there's a technical and human component that overlap, I would, as you get into it, really start looking at how do we make the whole process better? Because there are
Yeah.
significant gaps in just checking boxes. How do you make it more real, real world enabled and than that? We have time for one more question,
Oh,
and
can I say one more? Because I actually
absolutely.
have it connecting a few different dots. Like if you're a GRC person, you may be well aware already that in security we reference NIST a lot, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, if I remember right. Don't quote me on that. And NIST is actively right now working on AI security standards. They're soliciting feedback and input for that. And that's open to anyone, right? And so you can sign up for that, you can participate in that process. And when you talk about ways to stand out in an interview, how often is that? Yes, I'm familiar with the core standards. Not only have I read them, I was a contributor towards them or provided input to help get them where they are today, right? Those are those free opportunities to get engaged in the community and really help stand out. So sorry to interrupt again, Pete, but I thought that was a good
No, it's
connected
perfect.
dot.
We have time for this last one, and this one actually. So this one, the answer to this is going to get a little complex, and so we've got to, especially given where the nature of the industry and everything else is right now. So let's be aware of that so we can wrap up. But the question is, and I'll go through this quickly, but and I just recently graduated with a bachelor's degree in computer science and had some internships as a web developer, but unfortunately not able to find a job in the software development field. So I decided to continue and learn more about cybersecurity since I really liked using Linux back in university days. Um, I'm still currently learning about cybersecurity at C3. Maybe you have a recommendation for tips that I could use in order to help me get my very first job. So that's part A. And then I've applied to some junior development jobs. Most of them told me that I lack experience. So this gets back to the one that we had previously, very similar in how do you get a junior role. I'm open to any cybersecurity roles, but have an inclination towards software development field. So maybe cybersecurity and software development. I'm not sure yet if maybe you have any recommendations.
Pick something. I think what I heard there is you've got this awesome jack of all trades experience, but I didn't walk away clear on what you wanted to do. If you like web application design, web application security testing is its whole thing, and they're always hiring there. If you like SDLC, that's a whole separate segment of security. There is overlap, but that's a completely different focus. And so I think if you can pick something and then or study all of them, find the one that you like the most and start learning more about that. I go back to you'll start to see where there are communities that are doing that one thing, but you miss them when you're operating up here and you're talking about all different areas of IT or different areas of security. The deeper you go, the more you'll find them, and then you're able to get connected, and all that previous advice applies.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. Mostly BC. I want to thank you for being here today, taking time. I know things are extraordinarily busy there, especially since what you did to the whole, internet the other day. So the anyway, so look, the insight was phenomenal. Thank you very much. Thank you for being open and candid. So one of the probably the biggest takeaway that I took from today is from you is that there's not a single right path into cybersecurity, but it's about the mindset, the curiosity, the discipline, and the willing to keep learning as the industry evolves. What you'd mentioned, AI is accelerating both opportunity and risk, and really this conversation reinforced something important, which is the fundamentals matter, and you hit on that several times. Understanding the systems, the people, the behavior. Just because the tools change doesn't mean that those do. To the students here today, those who are either early in their careers, transitioning careers, your careers are going to be shaped more than job titles. Okay, they're going to be shaped by the relationships you build. They're going to be the questions you ask and the reputation that you earn over time, and that sticks with you. So this is the first session of this chat series, the first truly interactive session, and I want to give you a quick preview of what's coming next. We've got a long list of people over the course of the next several months who are going to be coming. Our next guest leads insider threat from one of the largest financial institutions in the US. And for those of you not familiar with insider threat, it is a intersection of technology, but also human behavior, risk, leadership, trust. It's massive, especially when you think about financial industry. He's also a distinguished author, and he is the host of a multidisciplinary podcast and has about 500 episodes. So he's going to be absolutely phenomenal on this. And he covers cybersecurity, leadership, decision making, et cetera. So stay engaged, stay curious, and keep showing up. These conversations matter more than you realize right now. And thank you all for joining us today. And BC, thank you again for helping us kick off the series. Take care, everybody.